going to explain our third demand. This is an ongoing series. We still got quite a few more episodes to go. But I always love talking to my friends here, Ak and Zoya. Um, so I want to pass it off immediately. I want to go to Zoya so we can explain what we're going to be talking about today on demand number 3. I'll pass it to you.
All right, so we're going to get into the details of this, but first, just to let you guys know what the actual demand is. It's demand 3, eliminate discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing.
More episodes to go.
Repeal the 1994 Crime Act. Abolish Public Law 280, transfer authority directly to tribal nations, and mandate that any criminal infraction on Indigenous lands be subject to sovereign nation laws, regardless if the individual is a member of the Indigenous Sovereign Nations. And broken windows policing, stop and frisk, racial profiling, repeat offender policing, gang policing, drunk driving checkpoints, neighborhood policing, immigration paperwork requests, and all other racially biased practices. Decriminalize poverty by repealing all laws related to the street economy, sex work or drug trades, and the occupation of public spaces, panhandling, or public urination. And mandatory arrest and failure to protect laws that lead to the criminalization of survivors of gendered violence, and all fines and fees associated with the criminal legal process, including ticketing, cash bail, court costs, and parole and probation fees. Implement stringent limitations on the number of cases managed by public defenders. Limit prosecutorial discretion and end prosecutor immunity. Immediately remove all law and oath-breaking judges. Document and publicly report racial and economic disparities on a court-by-court and judge-by-judge basis. That's the demand. And do you have some statistics and insights for us?
Yeah, so I'll just start off with how the U.S. police force started. It started off as a racial and class-based patrol. They actually, the first police force in the U.S. was created in 1704 in South Carolina as a slave patrol. Slavery was becoming more profitable at that point after the invention of the cotton gin, which in turn increased slavery ownership. As ownership increased, so did the number of slave uprising and escapees, which is why slave patrols grew in the U.S. South and continued until the end of the Civil War. Famed U.S. military academies, such as the Virginia Military Institute and the Citadel, were training cadets to apprehend and punish escaped slaves, which traces back to demand number 2, the literal militarization of police. Even before the military was involved formally with creating these patrols, patrollers were already heavily armed with guns, bludgeons, and sabers, and were encouraged to use any necessary force possible. This has set the tone for police brutality for the last 400 years. And it's not really even a North or South issue. After slavery was abolished, the harsh punitive laws used against the South directly contributed to the scapegoating of Black Americans. Kind of the first example of broken windows policing, if you think about it, just an atmosphere of unrest and of fear actually creating more crime. These patrols, were supported by the Union Army and were formed and enforced in areas outside of the South as well. And see, about the 94 crime bill, actually 5 years, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. 5 years after it was passed, actually, 74% of death row inmates were people of color in 1999, and they only account for 31% of the population. Going back to the slave patrols, I feel like that's a direct continuation of lynching right there. An actual type of ethnic cleansing that the crime bill had actually pushed. We're tying back into slave patrols and further continuation till this day. One thing.
Thank you for adding that. Awkward. You got anything you want to introduce this about this third demand?
Yeah. Broken windows policing suggests that If something, well, for instance, a window is broken, it will lead to more crime, and that the solution to fixing, low-level crimes is more police. Of course, we know that the reason windows might be broken is because of poverty, not because the people who might be breaking windows are hardcore criminals who should be incarcerated. This is one of the many means that we mention in the demand by which the poor and people of color are targeted and patrolled by police looking for low-level offenses to bring people into the system. And once you're in the system, it's incredibly difficult to get out. For one, 75% of the people in jail have never even been convicted of a crime. They're there because they can't afford bail. Once you have something on your record, it's very difficult to get a job. You are you're much more likely to experience sexual abuse, the violence that is in prisons and jails. It tears apart families and, as a result, communities. And certainly if you are held in jail or for an extended period in prison, you're most likely going to lose your job. Your family will suffer, poverty will increase, and that is the reason poverty and trauma are the reasons that people commit crimes. Drug abuse, for instance, is the result of trauma and poverty, people trying to find a way to, at least temporarily make their lives better, which of course leads to addiction. And if you're poor, the only way to get the drugs is to commit a low-level offense. You don't see white, rich neighborhoods heavily policed. So while rich white people are just as likely to use drugs and more likely to sell drugs, they're not the ones filling up the prisons and jails because they're not heavily policed and criminalized in the first place. And, to make matters, or to, make this even more clear, I have a number of pretty mind-blowing statistics. One of which is that if Black and Latino people were to be incarcerated simply at the same rate that white people are incarcerated, the prison population would decrease by 40%. Today, 1 in 3 Black boys born today will end up in prison. And the numbers are not particularly better for brown people. 1 out of every 6 Latino boys born today can expect to be sentenced to prison. A Black person is 500% more likely to be stopped without just cause than a white person. Being stopped is often what we see the videos of. Someone is stopped for a taillight. Someone is stopped for, driving erratically because of some arbitrary checkpoint that has been set up, for driving while Black or brown, for being in a too nice car in the wrong community, for being in a not nice enough car. Once they're stopped, cops are threatening. They intentionally give conflicting commands like, put your hands up, but show me your ID, or put your hands up, but open your car door and get out. These often lead to violence, which at the very best leads to police brutality, and often much worse leads to murder. Black people are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white people. 32% of the US population is Black or Latino, but 56% of the incarcerated population is Black or Latino. As I said, Black and white people use drugs at similar rates, but the imprisonment rate of Black people on drug charges is 6 times that of whites. Black children represent only 14% of the youth population, but 32% of those arrested, 42% of those detained, and 52% of those tried in criminal court. when it comes to police murder, Black boys are 600% more likely to be killed by cops. When it comes to exonerations of the wrongfully accused, it's a miracle that exonerations ever happen. And this is the result of the tireless work of organizations like Innocence and others who, for little to no money, are defending criminalized communities who have already lost their cases due to, prosecutors and judges coordinating efforts to incarcerate them, and having a public defender who's either not doing their job or is doing the best they can with incredibly few resources and a way too overloaded caseload. But when you look at exoneration, there's been 1,900 so far, and Black people, representing only 13% of the population, have been 50% of those exonerated. So that's despite the racism of appeals court judges and the prosecutors in those cases. Still, 50% of them were Black, which just demonstrates the percentage of people who aren't white who are in prison, who, even if you believed prison was the right solution to our society's problems, didn't even commit a crime in the first place. And to go along with that, nearly half of all of those people currently serving life without parole, or virtual life sentences are Black. So it's pretty clear. And then you take in the fact that more Black men are in prison today than were enslaved in 1850. You can see that this is absolutely what it has been labeled by an international commission recently. It's crimes against humanity being perpetrated by a system that On said was created for the very purpose of removing the other, and in addition, profiting off of them, finding a way to continue to profit off the backs of Black people after slavery was abolished.
Hawk dropping facts as always. You 100% on point, man. And this is why when we discuss these things, it always make me so angry, because as a citizen journalist myself, I cover the class war, I cover foreign policy, and I cover state violence. And what I think is very important is connecting all these issues, because all the facts that you laid out there, now imagine the wealth that is siphoned from our community because of what you laid out there. Mm-hmm. So I always want to wake a lot of leftists up, and this is how I am able to get class conscious people to understand the importance of our demand here when we asking to eliminate stuff like broken windows policing, stop and frisk, racial profiling. Because when you see the wealth disparity, the racial income inequality gap, and it's worse now than it was in civil rights era, as you guys point out. The reason that is, a giant reason that is, because we are a victim of civil asset forfeiture. They aim for our community to do the broken windows policing. So now there's been studies done that show that Black community are victim of civil asset forfeiture around a 60% rate. And now other studies confirm that you have cops that steal more resources than criminals do. So that's a giant aspect of why Black people are struggling so much in wealth.
Yes.
That's why I want to connect all this together. Do you guys have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, there's more connections as it relates to that too. But first, for those who don't know, explain what civil asset forfeiture is.
It's legalized robbery, and it's based on a false premise. The premise is, if you are a criminal, and you should not be allowed to profit off of your activities. But there's literally no trial. They just steal stuff from people. And how is that legal? But once again, there's no one to enforce the law against them, so they can just get away with it. And that's why they go after disenfranchised communities, because there have been plenty of examples of where people can just challenge this in court and get their stuff back. But if you are from a disenfranchised community, this is part of the class war element in which I cover, you are less likely to be able to use the legal system to get your stuff back. And then people, at a certain point, it become not worth it, because you end up spending more money on the stuff than what they steal from you. And I know people personally who've been impacted by this. So it's a giant part of what makes this prison industrial complex immoral. This is a giant part of why it's hard for, if you one of the people that aimed at the most, like indigenous people and Latinos. Cause I speak on the black community because that's what I can speak more on their behalf, but I stand in solidarity with all of them. All of them are going through this wealth siphoning that pretty much go to the ruling class. But go ahead, Ark.
No, 100%. And
Give me
you
one second.
know, so in addition to what you've mentioned, which is someone who's labeled a criminal, who may or may not have committed a crime in the first place, the cops being allowed to come in and take all of their belongings. There's also the fact that first off, there's the fact that there's the percentage of those who commit crimes is vastly greater than the percentage of those deemed criminal. The example I gave about whites and black people using drugs at the same rates is a perfect example. Only certain people are labeled criminal and treated as such. But we've all jaywalked, even the most innocent people in the world have broken the law. It's a matter of who you are. That's what dictates, how the law responds to you. In addition to that, there's two other aspects of this. While they're taking money directly, out of the hands of black communities, brown communities, indigenous communities, prisons tend to be built in white communities, in poorer white communities, and in rural white communities. So, for instance, in New York, millions or however many people are arrested. Thousands of people are removed from their communities in urban areas, destroying the economy and the social networks of those communities. They are then brought to prisons upstate, and that provides jobs for uneducated or undereducated white people. And not only that, but when the census is done, the census counts the people who are incarcerated in the areas in which they're incarcerated, not the areas where their families live or where they were taken from. So communities that otherwise wouldn't have any black people, or who would have far fewer total people, are given vastly more resources because they're able to count their prison populations. And then the last part is you add in the fact that it's not just private prisons that are directly profiting off of mass incarceration. State, federal prisons, immigration detention facilities of all kinds, jails, all of them have, profit centers for corporations. The corporations profit off of the exorbitantly priced phone calls, where it's actually been demonstrated that certain companies have lobbied to have in-person visitation limited or made no longer possible, so that they can force incarcerated people to only rely on phones, which they then jack up the prices for. They profit off of the food that is provided, the clothing that is provided. They also have incarcerated people working for 2 cents, 3 cents, 10 cents to build their products. These are the same corporations that are donating to politicians who are making laws to perpetuate this, who are going to pass the George Floyd Act that gives $750 million more to the police, and they're going to celebrate that as a successful reform. And these are the same politicians that donate to the police foundations that empower police departments to continue to increasingly militarize and get away with all types of corruption. My last point, you mentioned stop and frisk. I just wanted to throw out one more set of statistics. Just taking a random year. In 2011, for instance, there were nearly 700,000 NYPD stops. 88% of them were innocent. 53% were Black, 34% were Latin American, 9% were white.
I have some statistics on stop and frisk as well. First of all, I just wanted to say that it's been ruled unconstitutional by a judge because it decreased the standard from probable cause to reasonable suspicion, and that's unconstitutional because you have rights, and reasonable suspicion ended up targeting minorities. So in 1999, Blacks and Latinos made up 50% of New York's population, but accounted for 84% of the city's stops. Those statistics have changed little in more than a decade. According to the court's opinion, between 2004 and 2012, New York Police Department made 4.4 million stops under the citywide policy. More than 80% of those stops were Blacks and Latinos. So see, once we cover Latinos too, now we're at 80%. And this one really was jarring for me. The likelihood a stop of an African-American New Yorker yielded a weapon was half that of white New Yorkers stopped. So that one hit me really hard. Do you guys have anything? Yeah, I mean, so obviously it's just a way to target people. Do you guys have anything else on stop and frisk?
Yeah, actually, as well, as a New Yorker, in just the last 3 months, COVID-related arrests, 68% of all arrests were Black citizens and 34% were Latinos. And like we mentioned, Black citizens only account for 25% of our population here, and Latinos only account for 30% of the population, and they are overrepresented right there. And just like Zoya said, even though arrests have fallen, the percentage by ethnicity has remained consistent for the last decade. And in California, it's a very similar trend as well. The Black population only accounts for 6% of the population overall, but 16% of all police stops are Black for the Black population. And for in terms of police stops, 32% of those police stops for the Black population resulted in further police action such as questioning, arrest, field interviews, citations. But for all other racial groups, it was 20% or less, which is pretty jarring considering that
and now considering how the police state is targeting my community, this is why I'm angry and terrified that I see the police budgets are continuing to increase, and we see the narrative that has been a repeated process that they have done over and over again. But I mean by that, they always say, "Oh, there's a crime wave going on right now." And this is a byproduct of capitalism, because capitalism is a system that crashes every 5 to 8 years. So when material needs go down, that when crime tend to increase. So they use the capitalism crash because crime is going up only because people are struggling under the coronavirus. The same thing that happened during 2010. They always use these situations to fund the police more. So that, and now the fact that they always go after our community, there's a lot of people that are having anti-capitalist sentiments. There was a poll that showed that African Americans are actually leading the charge, especially young African Americans. And then now we have news that Biden is going to target anti-capitalists, and they put them in the same category as neo-Nazis. So I'm trying to tell people to wake up because this is them actually fighting back. You guys, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, not only is he targeting leftists, people he's deemed to equate to Nazis, as you said, he's also giving. It just came out recently that he's requesting for his budget another $4 billion in federal subsidies for police. So I know
he was trying to ask some money for a hire program. But sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say he's attacking this from all angles. And this was the guy that, everyone said was the better solution.
The funny thing is, I kind of warned about this, and I won't make this last point. I don't want to get too off topic, but he ran to Trump's right during the election, and now Jen Psaki and the message that the Biden administration is sending out now, that since they ran on the mandate of increasing police budgets, that's why they're going to do it. They say, hey, people elected us, and we ran on the fact that we was anti-defund the police. So that's a giant problem. That's what I was kind of warning people about. You guys have any last thought? Then we get back on the third man, discuss some more racial profiling.
Well, the one thing I'll add is just that, after the longest sustained period of social justice protest in our nation's history, while we did see, 20 or so cities defund police departments by a certain amount and reallocate to alternative solutions, overall across the country, the response to the year of protests in 2020 was an actual increase in police budgets.
Like the argument doesn't make any sense to me at face value, because like we talked about this before. If you look at the police budget and compare it to militaries across the world, we'd be number 3. So that's to me. Since I connect on the issues, I see that as part of the class war, and that's how they siphon wealth from the black community to the ruling class, and that's a giant point that I want to lay out there, because we gotta dispel the myth of what they actually do. Zoya, do you have anything you want to add?
I wanted to jump into the sex workers and drug statistics, if you guys are ready for that.
Sounds good.
So I'm going to focus on the drug angle first. So every 25 seconds, someone in America is arrested for drug possession. Every 25 seconds. The number of Americans arrested for possession has tripled since 1980, reaching 1.3 million arrests per year in 2015, 6 times the number of arrests for drug sales. So we're just arresting citizens at this point for just having possession. It's not even the people selling it. 1/5 of the incarcerated population, or 456,000 individuals, is serving time for a drug charge. Another 1.15 million people are on probation and parole for drug-related offenses. Incarcerating people for drug-related offenses has been shown to have little impact on substance misuse rates. Instead, incarceration is linked with increased mortality from overdose. In the first 2 weeks after their release from prison, individuals are almost 13 times more likely to die than the general population. The leading cause of death among recently released individuals is overdose. During that period, individuals are at a 129% greater risk of dying from an overdose than the general public. Incarceration has a negligible effect on public safety. Crime rates have trended downward since 1990, and researchers attribute 75 to 100% of these reductions to factors other than incarceration. Racial disparities. Black Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana charges than their white peers. In fact, Black Americans make up nearly 30% of all drug-related arrests, despite accounting for only 12.5% of all substance users. Black Americans are nearly 6 times more likely to be incarcerated for drug-related offenses than their white counterparts. Ak mentioned that earlier. Almost 80% of people serving time for a federal drug offense are Black or Latino. In state prisons, people of color make up 60% of those serving time for drug charges. In the federal system, the average Black defendant convicted of a drug offense will serve nearly the same amount of time as a white defendant would for a violent crime. People of color account for 70% of all defendants convicted of charges with a mandatory minimum sentence. Thank you, 1994 crime bill in Biden. Prosecutors are twice as likely to pursue a mandatory minimum sentence for a Black defendant than a white defendant charged with the same offense, and Black defendants are less likely to receive relief for mandatory minimums. On average, defendants subject to mandatory minimums spend 5 times longer in prison than those convicted of other offenses. And now the fun part, the economy. Since 1971, the war on drugs has cost the United States an estimated $1 trillion. In 2015, the federal government spent an estimated $9.2 million every day to incarcerate people charged with drug-related offenses. That's more than $3.3 billion annually. State governments spent another $7 billion in 2015 to incarcerate individuals for drug-related charges. North Carolina, for example, spent more than $70 million incarcerating people for drug possession. And Georgia spent $78.6 million just to lock up people of color for drug offenses, 1.6 times more than the state's budget current for substance use treatment services. In contrast, marijuana legalization would save roughly $7.7 billion per year in averted enforcement costs and would yield an additional $6 billion in tax revenue. The net total, $13.7 billion, could send more than 650,000 students to public universities every year. And on the sex working, many countries have legalized sex work. And all the studies indicate that legalizing sex work lowers violence and disease. So always we come back to the fact that criminalization unequally targets minority populations and definitely does not benefit society as a whole.
Yeah, and once again, my whole philosophy is based on the entire idea that you got to have government that justifies itself, and that is consistent with all the policies I support. Medicare for All, for example, is a policy that inherently justifies itself because it boosts wages, it saves $68,000 per year. It's a great policy idea. But when you have the criminalization of sex work and a lot of these things that we are advocating for, when we talk about we want to make sure we can legalize sex work so it'd be safer for workers, and when we actually want to advocate for more housing and education instead of the criminalization of the communities, because these things have been proven to work. That's why I'm glad that you highlighted that, because we are the serious people in the room, despite the discussion on the contrary. They always want to pretend that people who talk about police abolition are unreasonable, but you gotta flip it to the alternative. The people who advocate for a giant police budget, the people who advocate for civil asset forfeiture, the people who advocate for stop and frisk, they are the ones who are unreasonable. They are the one who have the burden to explain and justify their position, because we have the facts and numbers on our side as you guys laid out. And I do want to let you guys know, because we read out a lot of facts, and a great resource that you guys can check out. I showed the third demand on the screen, but the link here is 10forjustice.com, and then that has a lot of different resources, and so you can look up on your own time. Because we are dropping truth bombs. That's why I love having this panel on. Do you guys have anything else you want to add, addition to third demand? You want to go ahead on?
Just in terms of what you said about the site having a lot of resources and people and the propaganda and disinformation campaigns that are convincing even well-intentioned people that it's people who want to defund the police that are the confused ones, or the ones who aren't serious. The amount of data that is available, even beyond what we've shared about the ways in which what we're doing now isn't working, is quite extensive. And then you add into it the fact that police are only solving 2% of all major crimes. And the direct response to those who are talking about a crime wave that isn't actually real, it's a lie. But even if it were, it would only suggest that cops aren't doing their jobs. It actually proves our point. So adding more of them to continue to not do what they are supposed to do is not the solution. And there are a ton, like you said, of resources on the site that go into great detail answering all of the questions, whether it's other interviews or conversations we've done or had, or a plethora of writings by Black feminist abolitionists, detailing what the alternatives would look like, and why things that are considered positive reforms like the George Floyd Act are only strengthening the system itself, because they're not decarceral in nature. Every time something like that is passed, it just further, entrenches us in the belief that this is the right solution. We just need to, alter it a little bit, when it's clear that from the beginning, its intentions were never what we've been told they were. And in that way, they're doing a fabulous job. But in terms of serving and protecting, which is the lie, they're doing a very poor job of that, as it affects everyone except private property and rich white people.
Yeah, I have this on the screen. Go ahead, Zoya. Sorry, Anne. Go ahead. You muted.
Oh, in
But
addition to, sorry.
I have this here because this is kind of what we were talking about here. I'm kind of proud of myself for making this. I'll be honest. But this is their mindset. And I have stories I was covering on my show where they were trying to push this propaganda that you just will mention, Ak. And they were like, giant police budgets are failing to reduce the crime. And then they try to use that as an excuse of why we can't defund the police. It's like, that's the exact opposite. You guys suck. Like, you guys don't reduce crime despite the police budget. This is why we said we are on the right. They are the deeply unserious ones because we actually have the receipts. I just want to share that. But what was you about to say, on?
Oh, actually, back to the war on drugs, though. In addition to like our bloated police budget, it actually is a destabilizer worldwide. Because from like 2007 to 2018, 600,000 people were deported on drug use alone. And like many of those people are sent back to their home countries without any resources, without any ties to their family. And most of them actually go back to crime actually worldwide and actually destabilizes their local communities in which they have no actual ties. And that actually is just a death sentence for at least like 50,000 people worldwide when we actually deport people for drug offenses like that. I mean, it's just continued like a lower form of ethnic cleansing, if not like a form of actual carceral imperialism, I guess is the best way to put it. Just wanted to say that it actually is.
Well said. Do you guys have anything to add, Zoya, Ak?
I mean, it comes down also an issue that we really are not free in this country. The government is constantly violating our constitutional rights that, people are so hell-bent on saying, Constitution. Well, all of these policies, property forfeiture, stop and frisk, they hinge on violating the Constitution. So really, these are illegal actions, and they are supported because all the statistics we mentioned is that they're fueling the economy for corporations and taking money away from people and destabilizing society as a whole. They're very toxic, and pouring more funding into these kind of mechanisms only hurts society. So people really need to start understanding drug use, for instance. It's a health issue. It's a personal matter. It should be between you, your family, and health providers. And this is why Medicare for All and other policies that we push for are all interconnected. And it all comes down to funding social policies that help communities instead of being punitive.
Well said, Zoya. And another reason why this demand is so important, and I covered this a lot on my show when I try to connect all the issues together and discussing the class war. And one of the reasons why I tell people why we gotta end the carceral state, because it's part of the class war, and the regressive taxes and fees that are implied on the working class is a part of that. And on demand number 3, I'll pull it up for the viewers. You guys can see. But we are clear here on what the solution is: in all fines and fees associated with the criminal legal processing, including ticketing, cash bail, court costs, parole, and probation fees. And the only thing I have to say to back that up is just the stats that you guys laid out here today. Who are they targeting? They're targeting the poor and disenfranchised communities. So that's a regressive fine on the working class. Yep. A lot of these people are, I'll pass it right to you, Og, but a lot of these people are unjust. They are targeted when they haven't committed a crime, and then they got to pay a lot of fees just to prove they was innocent. So it's always a wealth transfer, and it has to end. But what was the point you about to mention, Og?
No, I mean, I was just going to go off that's 100% true. And it leads to the last part of the demand, which is what happens after you're arrested. So we have too few public defenders with too many cases. And then we have prosecutors who are allowed to decide the approach they're going to take with immunity to do so. So prosecutors break the law regularly and don't face consequences for it. They get to decide, what penalties they're going for. And one of the ways that we've extended or amplified or increased the carceral state is through the way that prosecutors function. So what they often do is they take people who are in a dire situation, who can't afford any of this, socially or economically or any other way, and they say, take this lesser charge and we'll just give you probation. We'll give you house arrest. So they're now in prison in their own homes, which greatly limits their ability to go to work, to take care of their kids, to be a part of their families and communities, or they're put in prison anyway on a lesser sentence. And these are people who, if they went to trial, wouldn't be convicted often in the first place. So the probation and electronic monitoring and house arrest and all of these things were at one time considered great reforms to address mass incarceration, only they've done the complete opposite. They've just expanded the network. And then you have all kinds of research documenting the judges who are regularly breaking their oaths, who, some are directly breaking the law, like feeding certain prisons with populations of people who don't belong there. And then there's just the ones who are racist in their decisions on what kinds of sentences they're going to hand down. So that's why it's incredibly important to both limit prosecutorial discretion and prosecutor immunity, actually act on the judges who've been found to be corrupt and breaking the law, and also to document and publicly report the disparities based on race and class, on a court by court and judge by judge basis. This way, the public is aware of what's happening, and those who are doing these things can be held accountable. And it's also one of the reasons why, for my show, the people I've interviewed multiple times now, abolitionists I've interviewed, have, when asked what we can do in our communities to further the cause, multiple times now, one of the answers has been to court watch. So one of the others is obviously cop watching, filming the police, because we don't want them to control the narrative with their own cameras. We want to be the ones pointing it on them.
Now
not
it's
them
scary
pointing
because
it
I actually
up.
seen some legislation that was pointed out in Ohio where they were trying to go after that, where they're trying to
Yes,
make it illegal to ban cell phone use, and
yep,
we gotta find a way to fight against
of
that. But
course.
go ahead, Ark. I just want to add that one point.
No, that's true. They know that that is a benefit to the public, because their cameras, which police unions lobbied for, is just expanding the surveillance state. They get to point it on who they want to point it on, and you throw in facial recognition, which is racially biased and often incorrect. And you're, connecting it to the NSA, and you're just building, it's a huge civil liberties issue. But when we film the police, we're in control, and they don't want that. But the other part of it is not just filming the police, it's watching the courts, going to the courts and watching to see who is prosecuted, how they are prosecuted, and who is sentenced and how they are sentenced, and reporting back to your community. That's something that anyone can do. This is a public arena.
Yeah, I want to actually add, I mean, a really stupid argument I keep hearing from pro-cop people is, oh, we talked about prophylactic measures to screen out and weed out potentially problematic police officers, yet they keep saying, oh, that would actually end up with fewer officers. We're already struggling to hire them. But like as we've discussed before, more police does not equal less crime. And that's actually something that we need to actually do. We need to actually push our communities, though, to, even though we are going to eventually abolish the police, to actually have screening, like we've talked about, like to actually have proper training and psychological testing and counseling for officers. So we actually don't have racist or classist police, because it's a real classist and racist system that we keep perpetuating. So, I mean, because like there's a study from an economist called Mark Hoekstra, at Texas A&M. He screened 2 million 911 calls. He, after examining about 1.2 million calls in 2 different cities, he found out that white officers were 5 times more likely to use their guns in deadly force when dispatched to neighborhoods of color than police officers of color to the same neighborhood. We have an inherently racist system, and like we just keep funding this racist system, and like no one seems to actually look at it that way. They think they're keeping us safe.
Yeah, so one thing I always want to talk to more liberal-minded friends. They are intellectually inconsistent on this issue. So if you look at how they feel about the drug war and legalizing marijuana, they don't. A lot of them believe we should end the drug war. But I explained before that police budgets was massively expanded in the 80s and ramped up because of the war on drugs. So if you want to end the war on drugs, how can you be against defunding the police and giving them less resources? That intellectually inconsistent, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And in general, Americans need to understand that we have to respect individual autonomy. What people are doing, whether it's drug use or abortion with their bodies, it's not a criminalized issue. It shouldn't have anything to do with the legal system. And if people do need support where they feel like it's an addiction or a detriment to their lifestyle, they need resources. They don't need to be imprisoned. And drugs find their ways into prison, where people often become only more addicted. So the way to actually combat drug misuse is by funding treatment, not by incarcerating people. Another fun fact is that every 16 minutes, a person in America dies from an opioid overdose. In 2016, 42,249 Americans died from opioid overdoses. Whites have the highest rates of fatal opioid overdoses. So this is being treated as a health crisis. The way it's portrayed in the media and the way people want to address it, it's a major political topic. They're calling it an opioid crisis, and that's because it's impacting middle-class America and white people.
And Biden actually continued. Sorry, to let you continue, Zoya, but Biden actually continued a Trump-era policy that implemented harsher penalties for people that use crack cocaine and marijuana. So he's once again doubling down to the right. But what was you about to add, Zoya?
That Americans account for less than 5% of the world's population, but consume 80% of all opioids produced globally.
Wow.
So 80% of opioid consumption is happening right here. And that's something to really be reflected upon. Because if we had a healthier society that actually provided community services, less people would form dependencies on opioids. And this crisis was manufactured. It came through prescription legal drugs, and doctors basically flooded the streets of America. And of course, once people became addicted and they could no longer secure it the legalized way, that's when they had to get it from the street economy.
I always go back to corruption once again. Yeah, anything you guys want to add here? I'm gonna stick around, so we can continue discussing more abolition theory. Any last thoughts, Og? Anything else you want to add? Anything you want to plug or promote?
I'll just say that the recording of this video will be made available at 10forjustice.com on the demands page under number 3. We'll be doing number 4 soon, so look out for that, and we'll share it on our Twitter accounts as well.
Yeah, and one thing that Zoya brought up, which is very crucial to my fundamental belief, and I always just say very simple: government must justify itself. And now I can outflank a lot of people who pretend they are small government advocates, and I'm like, you actually the nanny state support. You telling someone what they can do with their body or not. So it's legal for two adults to have sex, but they exchange $10 for it, and it's all of a sudden illegal. You want the police to kick down their door. Listen to what you're saying. Like listen, like let the propaganda go and actually pay attention to what you're advocating for. If you are advocating for civil asset forfeiture, you are supporting a giant government that has the legal authority to steal from you with no due process. So slow down and listen to what you guys are advocating for. This is why say you guys are deeply unserious. There's no thought that goes along with it. It's just years of propaganda, just years of Western fear that make people irrational about this issue. Because I don't know how anyone can listen to our discussion. We're about almost an hour in. I don't know how anyone can listen to the discussion and still be advocating for giant budgets and broken windows policing, killology. That's just very popular idea that police force advocate for. It's just like, you guys aren't serious, and we got the facts on our side, and this is why you see the tide turn significantly. Despite the narrative, we went from being deeply underwater last summer, and now we got majority of independents that support the idea of defund the police. Because I told people last year, I said I'm gonna make this argument because we are in the right, and people are starting to realize that. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah.
Oh, well, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I'm still looking.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, going back to your point, Nick, this is so on the spot though. I was just thinking about this just now. I mean, also with bloated police and military budgets, all these supposed liberals say, oh, I want progressive policy to pass. The one problem that conservatives always say is, how are we going to pay for it? Well, we keep paying for police and for war. That's why we can't pay for those stupid policies. You can't have those, you can't have your progressive policies if you don't have the money. We could take the money out from this unnecessary bloated for-profit system and actually help the people with it.
Yeah, 100%.
And we can always look back at history to see how these things work out. Prohibition does not work. We had alcohol prohibition in this country, and the only thing that it did was increase crime. People's use of alcohol actually went up. People dying from alcohol consumption also increased, because now it wasn't created in safe settings, and you had people substituting ethanol and all sort of things instead of alcohol, because you created a street economy, and there will always be a person because the demand is there. The demand for the substance is there. So unless you want to legalize it and tax it, and that way making it beneficial to the community with the taxes and offering resources for people who need treatment, when you criminalize it, all you're doing is creating crime. There will always be people stuck in poverty that will fill the role of distribution. It's just basic economics.
And I'll just throw in response to what Nick was saying, or adding on to it, Data Progress is a research company that has proven the efficacy of its studies. They basically predicted all of the New York City races recently. They had a poll in May that found that a majority of voters across the political spectrum actually want to shift public safety functions from cops to unarmed civil officers, social workers, and EMTs by an 18% margin. That includes Republicans. So it is pure fallacy. It is pure propaganda that is leading people to believe that the slogan "defund the police" is problematic.
This is why I love talking to you guys. There's just so much substance stuff that comes through these conversations. We can like bounce these kind of theory back as long as possible. I mean, we're about an hour in. I told you guys
Yeah.
I still have a few things I wanted to cover. I mean, I'm still down to talk to some more, but I know I still want to be respectful of your guys' time. So,
I'm
um,
I'm in the midst of like a total family crisis. My wife and sister are going to kill each other, so I do have to go. Um, just don't tell anyone I said that. Don't tell either of them I said that. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Nick, for hosting this. Thank you to Fred Hampton Left for hosting this, and thank you to you guys who joined, as the listeners as well as my fellow co-founders. I love you all.
yeah, I absolutely love these conversations, and once again, and you guys teach me a
Thanks.
lot as well. I always clear about the fact that I can improve and get better at and advocating for these issues. Anything else that you guys want to add or promote, Zoya or Ann, and then I'm gonna move on to some other topics.
Well, just another thing to think about. So we covered that 80% of opiate use is happening right here in America, and we happen to be at war with Afghanistan for already decades. So just something to think on. I don't want to push any narrative or go into conspiracy theories, but I want people to reflect on just the facts. So these are just the facts. For opium poppy farmers, sales of opium and poppy derivatives constituted the main source of income at 46% of overall income. The overall income generated by domestic consumption, production, and exports of opiates in Afghanistan was estimated at between 1.2 billion and 2.1 billion in 2019. Afghanistan has been the world's leading illicit drug producer since 2001. Afghanistan's opium poppy harvest produces more than 90% of illicit heroin globally. So just something fun to reflect on, that we are consuming 80% of opioids right here in America. So the greatest global demand for opioids is here. And the number one producer of opioids is Afghanistan. And we just happen to be at war with them.
Well said. Well said, guys. Anything else? Any last plug promotion? Like I
well,
say, what was that?
it's not really a plug, but like, one thing that I actually wanted to mention that actually is really prophetic, that I didn't mention in the discussion, but like it's something that like has stuck with me over the years and since I've been researching things like stop and frisk. In the 1968 Supreme Court case that actually made it legal, the lone dissenter judge William O. Douglas actually said in his rebuttal, we hold today that the police have greater authority to make a seizure and conduct a search than a judge has to authorize such an action. We have precisely said the opposite over and over again. To give police greater power than a magistrate is to take a long step down the totalitarian path. Perhaps this is such a step as desirable to cope with modern forms of lawlessness. That actually this is 1968. He predicted what our police force would become by allowing small little, but giving basically what he said was, give him an inch, he'll take a mile. He actually predicted that, and we actually can't keep letting police have more power. We can't keep, like you said, giving them more budget, more police officers. I mean, this is what's going to happen. We're just going to go down a totalitarian path.
Yeah,
And I'm glad that you mentioned that earlier.
that's why I love these conversations, because I think it's so important. This is how we move the needle, because I just hammer the points over and over and over again, how the system does not work, it does not justify itself. And I want to let anyone who's watching this know the onus and this is my approach to this. The onus is on them to defend the system, because the system, we've seen the result of their system. Their system leads to, it doesn't do anything to prevent crime. Only 2% of serious crimes are resolved. You got giant police budgets. There's literally life expectancies continue to go down in these communities because you got giant wealth that is being transferred from these communities. So that's the only thing. My question to everyone else is like, all right, how do you justify the NYPD budget? How do you justify stuff like stop and frisk? How do you justify civil asset forfeiture? That the onus is on them. But I still want to continue to make the argument, because we still have a lot of ground to make. because I have been openly celebrating the ground we have made. Because what other policy have you ever seen gone from minus 35 that was 538 recorded, and now it was plus 55% with independents, 74% in Democrats, 1 out of 5 Republicans. Like, this is a massive gain, unheard of gain. Even Medicare for all didn't grow that fast. Even legalizing marijuana didn't go that fast. Legalizing gay marriage, like, these things took years and years and years, and we had 1 year ever since the George Floyd incident. Obviously, this has been a long work in progress over many organizations, but that's when it really hit off, because that's when we started making the demand as an organized group that was marching, right? So that's why I went in on that. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
Thank you for having these discussions. And I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to continue to spread information and educate people. Cars kill people too, and we don't make cars illegal. We need a rational approach that's focused on solutions. So thank you for covering these topics and having us on.
No, it's an honor, because I always love having you guys on. It's always super fun. It's always very informative. My friend Finney is in the house. Like, my thing, I told y'all, I'm not kicking out. My main thing, I wasn't trying. I'm not kicking you guys off. It's just whenever you guys are ready to do other things, you guys can bounce out. But me and Finney about to have a good time. We got a lot to talk about. Anything else?
I'm gonna miss this. That I have to go.
No,
but
I
at least
appreciate you coming on.
I'm glad I got to stay on long enough to say hi to you.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you, comrade.
Hi.
Yeah, you too.
Hi.
All right, I love you all. Peace out.
Peace out. Thank you for coming on.
Love you too.
Yeah, all right, I'm gonna go too. All right, nice seeing
Thank
you,
you,
Fani.
guys.
I love your Twitter profile. All right, bye.
Yeah.
I just want to say, since I do have an opportunity to meet you, every time I watch you, I get fired up. And I'm just like ready to go with the system. So thank you for all you do. You're a beautiful, amazing, powerful voice in our struggle.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you. Such an honor to share space with you. Thank you.